Genesis. In Genesis chapter 18, we are given this picture of God coming down to earth. Jesus himself appears in the flesh before Abram. He tells him, you are going to have a child. And remember, that is where Sarah actually laughs. And, God asks the question, well, where is Sarah? Why is she laughing? Why is she doing this? After we see this, the scene of the direct revelation that Isaac is going to be born, we have a shift in focus where in chapter 18, God says, what are we going to do about Abraham? What are we going to do about Abraham and the reality that we're fixing to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah? So the rest of chapter 18, starting in verse 16, I believe, and all of chapter 19 details God's judgment. It details the reality that God is our judge. And it talks a little bit about what's involved with that. It begins with judgment being foretold. In verse 16 we read, then the men rose from there and looked toward Sodom, and Abram went with them to send them on the way. And the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am doing? Now, understand, he goes on to talk a little bit about this. He says, Abraham is justice, he's a righteous man. He is my chosen. Should I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Because I'm about to destroy these cities. Remember, Lot is in these cities. We talk about Sodom and Gomorrah, but we need to understand that it is Sodom and Gomorrah and 5 other cities in the plain, and it would have been 6. But as we study this, you'll notice that one of the cities is spared due to Lot's intervention, basically Lot's laziness, if we really get down to it. So one city spared, but it would have been Sodom, Gomorrah, and 6 other cities. So God says, should I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? And then he goes ahead and he lets him know. He foretells. He basically says, here's what's about to happen. In verse 20, he says, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grave, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry against them that has come to me. And if not, I will know. Now, this is a very interesting thing. Did God already know the sinful nature of these people? Absolutely. Did God already know their hearts? Absolutely. This is a showing of God giving repentance a chance. God is going to go there himself. He's going to send his representatives. He's going to find out, are they really going to do this? Are they really going to be as outrageously wicked as they are? He's giving them one more chance because he's ready to destroy them. Now, how wicked are they? It's one thing for me to get up here and say that Sodom and Gomorrah were a wicked people, that they were evil, that they did this or they did that. We need to understand how wicked they were. And we also need to understand exactly what we're talking about. It is often said that Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed because of homosexuality. And that is true. But there's more to the story. Homosexuality is a very important factor. But they were destroyed for more than just that. And we need to understand that their wickedness is a far cry from what we typically credit them having. As it continues on in chapter 19, skipping to 19, we look, now the 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face towards the ground. And he said, "Here now, my lords, please turn into your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go on your way." And they said, "No, but we will spend the night in the open square." But he insisted strongly. So they turned into him and entered his house. Then he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. I want you to understand, Lot knew how wicked Sodom and Gomorrah were. He knew how wicked Sodom was. He sits at the gate of the city. That means he is a prominent man. He is one who welcomes in travelers. He is a respected individual. Those who sit at the gate of a city. This isn't like he's a watchman or a guardsman. He is someone, he is a dignitary. He is a representative of the city, is the idea. It's a position of honor. He greets them. He welcomes them into his house. And then he immediately says, look, listen to what he says. Here now, my lords, please turn into your servant's house, spend the night, wash your feet. He's offering them all the hospitality they could want. You may rise early and leave. He says, you wake up early and you get out of here. And then when they go, no, we're going to stay in the open square. We're going to stay in the town square. He says, no, you can't do that. He insists strongly. He knows exactly what's going on. He knows how bad the city is. So Lot understands. He knows the wickedness of Sodom. And in verse 5 we go that the people, when they find out, word travels fast. When the people found out, they go to Lot and they said to him, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them carnally. I want you to understand that in the next few verses, Lot offers his virgin daughters to these men to do whatever they please. This is not just homosexuality. Is that a very large part of this? Yes. But these men, these town people, are trying to basically rape these two angels in a mass setting. It would be a violent gang rape. And they were going to do it in the open. They weren't hiding it. They weren't trying to disguise it. That is the wickedness that we're seeing. It is so wicked that they're trying to break in. They refuse Lot's daughters. They don't want willing people. They want unwilling people. They refuse Lot's daughters. They try to break in the house. The angels have to intercede, step out, and blind the crowd. So we see it's a wicked people. We understand in Ezekiel chapter 16, Ezekiel the prophet talks about Sodom and Gomorrah. Speaking about Sodom directly, he says, look, this was the iniquity of your sister Sodom. She and her daughter had pride, had fullness of food and abundance of idleness. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and the needy. And they were haughty and committed abomination before me. Now the abomination, that is homosexuality. That is what the book of Leviticus refers to homosexuality. It refers to it as an abomination. So that is a reference back to that. But they committed abomination before me, therefore I took them away as I saw fit. God, in describing why he destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, he says that they were prideful. They were arrogant. They did not treat the poor, the needy, with the respect and the demanded obligation that God gives them. So you see that they were a sinful people in every aspect. They hated those who they should have been seeking to protect. They're prideful. And as Jude tells us in Jude 7, as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them in a similar manner to these, having given themselves over to sexual immorality and gone after strange flesh, are set forth as an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. Jude tells us that they were sexually immoral, which means they had a variety of sexual sins. And they went after strange flesh, a reference to homosexuality. Not only are they homosexuals, not only are they practicing that sin, but they are also sexually immoral all the way around. So we understand God condemns them. It is an abomination. God condemns homosexuality through this this account. But Sodom and Gomorrah's wickedness, Sodom and Gomorrah's sin is so much more than just homosexuality. They are a people who have completely and totally abandoned God's will for them. And God tells Abraham, I'm going to destroy them because of it. I'm going to destroy these people. And I want you to know, Abraham, because again, Lot's there. And I want you to understand that that's the next point of our lesson, that Abraham, being who he is, remember God refers to him as a righteous man. Abraham being who he is, he says, I want to discuss this. In chapter 18, verse 23, Abraham came near and said, would you destroy the righteous with the wicked? Abraham hears the discussion that the angels are having with Christ. And he says, are you going to destroy those who are righteous with the wicked? And he starts bargaining with God. It's a very interesting account. As we go through it, he starts bargaining. He says, what about 50 people? If there are 50 people, would you destroy the city for the sake of the 50? And God says no. If there are 50 people there, I'll spare it. Verse 24. Then we're not given the exact details that follow, but Abraham responds. It seems to be the indication that in God's answer, he tells them there are not 50 people. In his answer, Abraham then responds in verse 27, what about 5? Would you destroy it? Say 5. What about 45 people? Would you spare the city for 45? And God says, I'll spare it for 45. In verse 29, he says, what about 40? Verse 30, he says, what about 30? Verse 31, he says, what about 35? What about 20? He goes all the way down to verse 32, and he says, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak but once more. Suppose 10 should be... Excuse me. Suppose 10 should be found. And he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. So the Lord went his way as soon as he had finished speaking with Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. There were not 10 righteous people in the city. And while one might argue that 4 were found, Lot's wife immediately turns back and her righteousness is brought into question. We're going to look at the end about the 2 daughters of Lot and their wickedness as soon as it follows. And given his wife, his 2 daughters, and his other children, plus the fact that Lot holds a prominent place, one has to really question the righteousness of Lot. Were there any in the city who were truly righteous? Or is the influence of such wickedness bound to leave its mark even on a man who had Abraham as an example? Sodom and Gomorrah is a great example of why we need to avoid evil, because of how corruptive it truly is. 10 people, and God could not find them. 7 cities. What about Lot? What is Lot doing during this time? Well, after they attempt to do what they're going to do, the angels tell Lot, look, this is it, I'm done. We're done. God sent us to destroy the city. And they ask him a question. They say in verse 12 of chapter 19, have you anyone else here? Son-in-law, your sons, your daughters, whoever you have in the city, take them out of this place, for we will destroy this place. Because the outcry against them has grown great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. Now in verse 14, what's really sad is that Lot goes and he talks to his son-in-laws. He talks to his daughters who are married. And he says to them, get up, get out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city. But to his son-in-laws, he seemed to be joking. So Abraham discusses the destruction, the judgment to come with God himself. Lot discusses it with the angels, and then Lot tries to discuss it with his fellow man. And in a very real Noah-esque example, we see those who are facing judgment ignore God's warning. How tragic is it to know that you were warned, that you were told, and yet you ignored the call? Finally, we see judgments delivered. In chapter 19, starting in verse 23, the sun had risen upon the earth when Lot entered Zoar. Then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. So he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. Chapter 19, verse 27, Abraham looking upon the destruction. Abraham went out early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. Then he looked towards Sodom and Gomorrah and towards all the land of the plain, and he saw and behold, the smoke of the land went up like a smoke of a furnace. And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrown cities, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had dwelt. Destruction was sure. You know, we have not found the ruins of Sodom and Gomorrah. All of our archaeological prowess, we can't find them. Some actually speculate that it's perhaps under the Dead Sea. That God created the Dead Sea with the impact of the destructive force of the fire and brimstone that fell from heaven. We just don't know. But everything that was in that city, all the plain, all the fields, all the people, all the animals were utterly and totally wiped out. But the account of Sodom and Gomorrah does not end there. The rest of chapter 19 finds us looking at Lot and his children. Now Lot eventually goes into a cave. And his children, his two daughters, those who he had offered up, they speak among themselves, and out of some misguided sense of obligation, responsibility, something, the Bible is not really clear on why they decide to do what they do. But the two daughters speak to themselves and say, hey, we need to continue our father's line. We need to make sure that he has children. They said there's no one there. It looks like they looked out and they said, well, everyone's destroyed. God destroyed everything, it seems. Maybe they're thinking back to God's promise of the destruction by fire and never by water. It seems that they assumed that everybody was gone. So both Lot's daughters make a pact. They get him drunk. And then one night after the next, the oldest and the youngest daughter sleep with Lot and become impregnated with his child. It was the corrupted influence of Sodom and Gomorrah that would lead his daughters to make such a foolish decision. It was the corrupted influence of these wicked and sinful cities that would cause them to desire to basically force their father to get drunk and then to commit sexual immorality with him. The same sexual immorality that we see is rampant in these cities. And because of that wicked influence, and what we need to remember this evening is that influence is long-lasting. You never know what your influence might do. You never know what your influence might cause. The first daughter had a son. She called him Moab. and he became the father of the Moabites. The second daughter had another son by the name of Ben-Ammi. He became the father of the Ammonites. These two nations, they would become nations, were among the most brutal and ruthless enemies of the Israelite people. They served and worshipped countless pagan gods. In many ways, they are the products of Sodom and Gomorrah. This evening, I want us to understand a few things. The first I want us to understand is that God warns his people of pending destruction. God told Abraham, I'm about to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Jesus tells us today, I will destroy the world. Jesus told the Israelites during his time, I'm going to destroy Jerusalem. It's the exact same thing. God warns his people of the coming destruction. He offers them a means of escaping it. He warned of Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, we'll go back further. He warned of the flood. He warned of Sodom and Gomorrah. He warned of the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. He warns today of the destruction of the world that's to come. And yet we see that every time there are those who disregard that warning. 8 souls were saved in the destruction of the world. Under the time in which Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, technically 3 people lived. In the destruction of Jerusalem, we're told, propaganda mind you, but we're told that not a single Christian life was lost. But you know how many countless Jewish people who rejected Christ, how many countless people who denied the truth of his teachings died? Estimates say over 1 million. Died a horrific death in the destruction of Jerusalem. How many will be saved? How many will heed the call today? God has announced that judgment is coming to this world. Will you heed the call? This evening, if you are here and you have not done what is necessary to be an obedient child of God, then we encourage you, we beg with you, we plead, come forward. Do not deny your opportunity. You're denying yourself. Do not deny your opportunity to have life eternal. In the book of Jude, in verse 7, Jude tells us that Sodom and Gomorrah are an example of those who will be cast into eternal fire, everlasting flame. God has prepared that for those who reject him. If you're here this evening and you've not lived your life in accordance to his word, if you haven't been baptized for the forgiveness of your sins, if you haven't done what is necessary to be a child of his, then we encourage you, please come forward. Let us sit down. Let us study with you. Let's do whatever we need to do. If you are ready, let us immerse you in the watery grave of baptism right now so that you might be a child of his. But if you've done that and somewhere on the way you've stumbled off the path, you realize that you need the prayers, you need the help of the congregation. That's what we're here for. That's what we desire to do. The Bible tells us that the angels rejoice every time a lost sinner comes home. Let them rejoice. Let us rejoice with you. If you're here this evening, you need the prayers of the congregation. We can help in any way. Now's the time as we stand and as we sing.
Kneel at the cross, Christ will meet you there.